Have you ever noticed how some children seem to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders? How some, at 8 or 9 years old, already speak like adults, make decisions that should be made by parents, console others when they should be consoled? If you were one of those children, or know someone who was, you know what I'm talking about. There's a silent pain, almost invisible, that accompanies those who were forced to grow up before their time. And today, I'm going to reveal a truth that society prefers to hide. Why these children, even while being admired for their maturity, end up suffering more in adult life. The answer will shock you and might explain many things about yourself. Imagine a 7-year-old child who, instead of playing, is taking care of younger siblings because the parents work too much. Imagine a 10-year-old girl who already knows how to shop, cook, manage the house because someone needed to take on those responsibilities. Imagine a 9-year-old boy who becomes his mother's emotional confidant, listening to relationship problems he shouldn't even understand. These children are frequently praised. How responsible, say the adults. So mature for their age, comment the neighbors. But what no one sees is the price this forced maturity charges. What no one perceives is that, underneath this apparent competence, there's a child who never had permission to be a child. And here's the first painful truth I need to share with you. When a child is forced to mature before their time, they're not really maturing. They're surviving. There's a fundamental difference between genuine maturity, which comes from natural development and gradual learning, and pseudo-maturity, which arises from the desperate need to adapt to circumstances that are beyond a child's emotional capacity. When a child takes on adult responsibilities, they develop practical skills, yes, but at the cost of their healthy emotional development. They learn to function, but they don't learn to feel. They learn to take care of others, but they don't learn to take care of themselves. Think with me. What happens when a child needs to be strong all the time? What happens when they don't have permission to cry, to be afraid, to be vulnerable? They learn to suffocate their emotions. They develop emotional armor so thick that, even when they grow up, they have difficulty accessing their own feelings. And here's the cruel paradox. These children become adults extremely capable of taking care of others, but incapable of asking for help for themselves. They become experts at solving others' problems, but live in denial of their own problems. But why does this happen? Why are some children pushed into this premature maturity? The reasons are diverse and often interconnected. Sometimes it's due to economic necessity. Parents who work so much to support the family that children need to take on domestic and caregiving functions. Sometimes it's due to family instability, conflicted divorces, addictions, parents' mental illnesses, situations where the child becomes the only stable element in the family. Sometimes it's due to emotional neglect. Parents who, although physically present, are emotionally absent, forcing the child to become self-sufficient too early. And sometimes it's due to disproportionate expectations. Families that put excessive pressure on the child to be perfect, responsible, an example to others. What all these situations have in common is a role reversal. The child, who should be cared for, protected, and emotionally nurtured, becomes the one who cares, protects, and nurtures. They take on the adult role before having had the opportunity to be fully a child. And this reversal creates deep wounds that can take decades to heal, if they heal completely at all. Because when you skip fundamental stages of development, those stages don't simply disappear. They remain there as unmet needs, echoing throughout adult life. Let me tell you a story that might sound familiar to you. I know a woman who at 8 years old was already cooking for the family, taking care of younger siblings, and mediating fights between her parents. She was praised by everyone as the perfect daughter, a golden girl. She grew up being seen as mature, responsible, trustworthy. Today, at 35, she's a successful professional, admired for her competence and dedication. But there's something few know about her. She can't relax. Literally, she doesn't know how not to be solving a problem, taking care of someone, being useful in some way. She feels guilty when she takes vacations, anxious when she has nothing to do, desperate when she's not being needed by someone, because her identity was built entirely on being the person who solves, who cares, who is always available. And when she's not exercising that role, she doesn't know who she is. And here we reach the heart of the matter, the most painful truth of all. Children who mature early develop an identity based on utility, not on inherent value. They learn from an early age that their worth is in what they do, not in what they are. They internalize the belief that they need to be useful, helpful, indispensable to be loved. And this belief accompanies them throughout their lives, creating a pattern of relationships where they always give more than they receive, always take on more responsibilities than they should, always put others' needs before their own. The result of this is devastating. These people become magnets for unbalanced relationships. They attract people who need to be cared for, who have problems to solve, who seek someone to take on responsibilities that should be theirs. And they do this voluntarily because that's how they learn to relate to the world. They don't know how to exist in a relationship where they're not constantly giving, solving, caring. The idea of receiving care, of being vulnerable, of admitting they need help is terrifying to them. But the suffering goes beyond relationships. These people also struggle with what I call emotional imposter syndrome. They are extremely competent professionally, can handle complex crises, are natural leaders. But when it comes to their own emotions, they feel completely lost. They don't know how to identify what they feel, don't know how to express emotional needs, don't know how to ask for help when they're suffering. It's as if they were fluent in all the languages of the world, except in the language of their own feelings. And here's another cruel aspect of this situation. These people frequently feel guilty for suffering. They look at their lives and see achievements, stability, people who depend on them, and ask themselves, why am I not happy? Why do I feel this emptiness? They judge themselves harshly for not being able to simply get over feelings they can't even properly name. They think they should be grateful for what they have, that they should be stronger, that they don't have the right to complain. After all, they were raised to be strong, to handle everything, to not be a burden to anyone. The truth is that these children who matured early never had permission to develop a healthy relationship with vulnerability. They learned that vulnerability is weakness, that needing someone is being a burden, that showing emotions is being dramatic. So they build entire lives avoiding these feelings, but what they don't realize is that vulnerability is essential for genuine human connection. Without vulnerability, there is no real intimacy. Without the ability to receive care, there is no reciprocity in relationships. Without permission to be imperfect, there is no self-compassion. But let's go deeper, because there's an even deeper layer to this wound. These children who were forced to mature early frequently carry a deep sense of betrayal. Betrayal because the adult world that should have protected them put them in situations they weren't prepared for. Betrayal because their childhood was stolen in the name of necessity or responsibility. And this betrayal creates a fundamental mistrust toward the world and people. They learn they can't count on anyone but themselves, that if they don't solve it, no one will solve it, that if they don't care, no one will care. This mistrust makes them hyper-independent. They prefer to do everything alone rather than risk being disappointed again. They prefer to carry excessive burdens rather than admit they need help. They prefer the exhaustion of total control to the vulnerability of depending on someone. And this creates a vicious cycle. The more they do everything alone, the more indispensable they become to others, and the less likely it becomes that someone will offer the care they secretly desire. And here we reach one of the most surprising discoveries about this pattern. Many of these people, even being extremely competent and successful, struggle with deep feelings of inadequacy because their self-esteem was built on doing, not on being. When they're not doing something productive, useful, necessary, they feel empty, useless, questionable. They developed an identity so intertwined with productivity and utility that they don't know who they are when they're not exercising those roles. This explains why so many successful people, admired for their maturity and competence, struggle with depression, anxiety, burnout. They're constantly running from themselves, constantly trying to prove their worth through what they do. They can't stop, can't relax, can't simply be. Because stopping would mean confronting the emptiness left by the childhood they never had, by the emotional needs that were never met, by the wounded child that still exists within them. But here's where the story begins to change, where we reach the moment of hope in this conversation. Because recognizing this pattern is the first step to healing it. When you understand that your hyper-responsibility, your difficulty in receiving care, your tendency to always put others first are not virtues, but symptoms of a deep wound, you can begin to work to heal that wound. The path of healing goes through several difficult but liberating stages. First, you need to grieve for the childhood you didn't have. You need to recognize and mourn for the child who was forced to grow up before their time, who took on responsibilities that weren't theirs, who learned to care for everyone, except themselves. This grief is essential because you can't heal what you don't recognize as lost. Second, you need to learn to identify and honor your own emotional needs. This can be extraordinarily difficult for someone who has spent their entire life focused on others' needs. It's like learning a foreign language. At first, everything seems confusing and uncomfortable. But with practice, you can develop the ability to recognize when you're tired, when you need support, when you're overwhelmed, when you need time for yourself. Third, you need to learn to establish healthy boundaries. For someone who was raised to always say yes, always be available, always solve others' problems, saying no can seem selfish or cruel. But boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges to healthier and more balanced relationships. When you establish boundaries, you're teaching people how to relate to you respectfully and reciprocally. Fourth, and perhaps most challenging, you need to learn to receive care. This means allowing other people to do things for you, accepting help even when you could do it yourself, being vulnerable enough to share your difficulties. It's scary because it goes against everything you learned about how to stay safe in the world. But it's essential for creating genuinely intimate and satisfying relationships. And finally, you need to reconnect with your inner child. Not in an infantile or regressive way, but in a healing way. You need to give that wounded child what they never had. Permission to play, to be imperfect, to need care, to exist simply for the joy of existing, not for the utility they can offer. When you begin to do this work, something magical happens. You discover that you can be loved not for what you do, but for who you are. You discover that you can have relationships where there's real reciprocity, where you give and receive in balanced proportions. You discover that you can relax without guilt, that you can make mistakes, without that defining your worth, that you can ask for help without being a burden. More importantly, you discover that your sensitivity, your capacity to care, your emotional intuition, all these qualities you developed as survival mechanisms, can become genuine gifts when they come from a place of fullness, not emptiness. When you care for others because you choose to do so, not because you need to do so to feel valid, the care becomes purer and more powerful. You also discover that your early maturity, however painful its origin may have been, gave you valuable skills: deep empathy, leadership capacity, emotional resilience, sharp intuition. When these skills are balanced with self-care and healthy boundaries, they become superpowers, not burdens. And perhaps the most liberating discovery of all is this: you don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You don't need to solve all problems, care for all people, be strong all the time. You have permission to be human, to have needs, to make mistakes, to need rest, to be cared for. You have permission to live a life where you're not constantly proving your worth through what you do for others. If you recognized yourself in this conversation, if you were one of those children who matured before their time, I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with you. What you developed were brilliant survival strategies to deal with situations that were beyond what any child should face. You deserve compassion, not judgment. You deserve healing, not more suffering. And most importantly, you deserve to be loved not for what you do, but for who you are. The healing journey isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. There are moments when you'll want to return to old patterns because they're familiar, even if painful. There are moments when establishing boundaries will seem selfish, accepting care will seem like weakness, prioritizing your needs will seem wrong. But every time you choose to honor your humanity instead of your utility, you're taking a step toward freedom. And here's the most beautiful truth of all. When you heal yourself, you don't just transform your own life, but you break a cycle that may have existed for generations. You become an example that it's possible to be strong and vulnerable, competent and in need of care, mature and playful. You open a path for other people to also heal their own wounds from stolen childhood. If this conversation touched something deep in you, if you recognized your own story in the words I shared, I want to make you a special invitation. In the comments below, share your experience. Were you a child who had to mature early? How did this affect your adult life? What strategies did you discover to heal these wounds? Your story might be exactly what someone struggling with the same patterns needs to hear. There's no shame in admitting you carried responsibilities that weren't yours. There's courage. And if this reflection made you see your life from a different perspective, if it helped you understand patterns you maybe couldn't explain before, leave a like on this video. This shows me that content like this is important, that these conversations about healing and self-knowledge make a difference in the real lives of real people. Each like is a way of saying that you value spaces where we can talk about deep wounds with honesty and compassion. And if you want to continue this journey of healing and self-knowledge, subscribe to this channel. Here, we'll continue exploring the unconscious patterns that govern our lives, the wounds that shape our relationships, and the paths to genuine transformation. Together, we can create a community where we don't need to be perfect to be accepted, where we don't need to carry the weight of the world to have value, where we can simply be human in all our complexity and beauty. Because the greatest truth I can leave you with today is this. You deserve the greatest truth I can leave you with today is this. You deserve a TGGDUV today is this. You deserve life where you're not constantly proving you deserve to exist. You deserve relationships where you can give and receive in balance. You deserve moments of rest without guilt, vulnerability without judgment, care without having to care in return. Your wounded inner child deserves to finally find the peace they always sought. And you, the adult you became, deserve to live from a place of fullness, not emptiness. The world needs your light, but that light shines brighter when it comes from a healed,